I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened at the siege of Verathkas. Every species in the Galactic Compact has a story, a founding myth, a legend they whisper to their young when the stars grow dim and the void feels too close. The Selvari have the Pale Warden. The Dreth speak of the Iron Chorus. The Torani believe their ancestors once swallowed a dying sun and carried its fire inside their blood for 10,000 generations. But there was one myth that didn't belong to any single species. It belonged to all of them. They called them the ghosts of the Third Arm, the Pale Walkers, the Burning Ones. Depending on which world you grew up on, depending on which dialect your mother sang you to sleep in, the name changed. But the story was always the same. Somewhere in the far reaches of the galaxy's third spiral arm, in a region of space so thick with radiation and debris that no sane civilization would ever try to colonize it, somewhere out there lived a species unlike any other. Soft-bodied, fragile, laughably short-lived. And yet, according to the myths, they were the most dangerous thing the universe had ever produced. I never believed it, not once. I was a combat correspondent for the Compact's 7th Information Bureau. My name is Caith Plateau, and I am Selvari, which means I was born with silver-white skin, 3-jointed fingers, and a predisposition toward skepticism that my commanding officers found alternately useful and infuriating. I had covered 14 engagements across 6 star systems. I had watched the Dreth Phalanx crush a Moravan raiding fleet at Gentle Station. I had stood on the bridge of the Conviction of Stars when it broke the blockade at Yanara. I had seen war, and I had never, in all my years, seen anything that made me think the old stories about the Burning Ones were anything more than campfire nonsense. That changed at Verathkas. That changed in about 9 minutes. The Verath system sat at the intersection of 3 major trade corridors, a position that made it strategically essential and unfortunately almost impossible to defend. The system's primary world, Verathkas, was a temperate planet with shallow lavender oceans and wide continental plains covered in a kind of bioluminescent grass that glowed faintly amber at dusk. It was beautiful. Quiet, home to roughly 400 million Torani civilians who had never asked to be at the center of anything. The Moravan ascendancy had been pushing into compact space for almost 3 standard years. Slow, methodical, brutal, they didn't negotiate, they didn't posture. They simply arrived with their carrier fleets, dropped their ground legions, and ground everything beneath them into rubble and silence. Verathkas was next. We all knew it. The Compact had positioned the 9th Combined Fleet in high orbit, a formidable force on paper. 87 warships, 12 carrier groups, ground support elements drawn from the Selvari 4th Legion and the Dreth Ironwall Brigade. It should have been enough. It wasn't. The Moravan came with everything. I was on the surface when it started, embedded with the Selvari 4th's forward observation post on the Caith Plateau, a flat-topped highland overlooking the planet's primary spaceport and the capital city of Tavrathsal below. The plateau gave us excellent sightlines, and as it turned out, an excellent view of the end of the world. The first Moravan ships breached the outer defense perimeter at 3:47 local time. I know the exact moment because I was awake, sitting outside my shelter unit with a cup of something hot and bitter that the Torani called keshari, their version of a morning stimulant. It tasted like burnt wood and regret, but it kept your eyes open. The sky above was still dark. The bioluminescent fields stretched out below the plateau in every direction, glowing that soft amber, pulsing gently like something breathing in its sleep. Peaceful. The kind of scene you'd put on a recruitment poster if you wanted to remind people what they were supposedly fighting for. Then the sky split open. Not metaphorically. The Moravan's first volley hit the orbital defense grid, and the energy discharge was so massive that it ionized the upper atmosphere in a cascade of white and violet light. It looked like someone had taken a blade to the darkness and cut it in half. The sound came 4 seconds later, a deep, rolling concussion that you felt in your teeth before you heard it with your ears. I dropped the keshari. Lieutenant Commander Valith, my assigned escort, and I had come to learn over the previous weeks, one of the most unshakably calm officers in the entire Selvari military, was beside me in an instant. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just looked up at the sky, watched the light ripple across it like something alive, and said very quietly, "That's more ships than intelligence projected." She was right. Intelligence had estimated a Moravan fleet of 40 to 60 capital ships. What came through the breach was closer to 200. They filled the orbital display like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. Within minutes, the 9th Combined Fleet was fully engaged. Within an hour, it was being pushed back. And the ground assault hadn't even started yet. The Moravan dropped their first legions at dawn. If you've never seen a Moravan ground deployment, I hope you never do. Their drop pods aren't like ours. They don't aim for precision or subtlety. They use mass. Hundreds of armored pods, each carrying between 20 and 40 soldiers, falling from low orbit in dense clusters. The pods are designed to hit hard enough to crater the ground on impact, sending shockwaves that disorient defenders and shatter fortifications. Then the doors blow open, and the Moravan come out already firing. They're big, that's the first thing you notice. Most galactic species fall within a relatively narrow size range. The Selvari average about 2 meters, the Torani slightly less, the Dreth slightly more. The Moravan are 3 meters tall. 3 meters of dense bone, layered muscle, and skin that has the color and approximate texture of volcanic rock. They don't wear armor in the way most species understand it. They wear augmentation rigs, mechanical exoskeletons bolted directly onto their bodies that enhance their already considerable strength and project localized kinetic barriers. Fighting one is like fighting a small vehicle. Fighting 100 is like fighting a natural disaster. They hit the Caith Plateau at 6:11. I should tell you that I am not a soldier. I carry no weapon. My job, as defined by the 7th Information Bureau's charter, is to observe, record, and report. I have a small imaging drone, a data pad, and a communication uplink. When the shooting starts, I am supposed to find cover and stay alive long enough to tell the story afterward. That morning, finding cover became a creative exercise. The first wave of pods hit the eastern slope of the plateau, about 3 kilometers from our position. The ground shook, actually shook. Not a tremor, a sustained, rolling vibration that made the rocks under my feet feel like they were trying to slide sideways. The amber glow of the bioluminescent grass flickered and died in expanding circles around each impact point, as if the planet itself was recoiling. Lieutenant Commander Valith was already on the comm, coordinating with the 4th Legion's command element. Her voice was steady, professional, the kind of calm that comes from training so deep it's almost biological. Forward positions engage at range. Do not allow them to consolidate on the plateau rim. All units defensive pattern Celtwelve. Hold the line. Hold the line, 3 words that meant everything and promised nothing. The Selvari 4th was good. I need you to understand that. They were one of the most decorated ground units in the entire compact military. Their soldiers were disciplined, well-equipped, and experienced. They held the eastern approach for almost 40 minutes against the first wave, pouring precise fire into the advancing Moravan columns and making them pay for every meter of ground. But the Moravan didn't stop coming. The second wave dropped at 6:38, then the third at 7:02. Each wave was larger than the last. The plateau's eastern edge became a wall of smoke and noise and death. I watched from behind a shattered rock formation as Selvari soldiers, people I had shared meals with, people whose names I knew, were torn apart by Moravan kinetic rounds that hit like miniature explosions. Private Orenthi, he was 23. He had shown me a picture of his sister's newborn daughter 2 nights earlier. He was behind a barricade reloading when a Moravan heavy round punched through the barrier and took him off his feet. He didn't get up. Sergeant Telani. She was the one who had warned me, on my first day with the unit, never to drink Keshari on an empty stomach. She died holding a breach in the perimeter long enough for her squad to fall back to secondary positions. She killed 4 Moravan soldiers in the process. It wasn't enough. By 7:30, the 4th Legion had been pushed back to the plateau's central ridgeline. Casualties were severe. Ammunition was running low. The orbital situation was no better. The 9th Fleet was fully engaged and unable to provide ground support. No reinforcements were coming. That was when Colonel Marath, the 4th Legion's commanding officer, made the call that everyone on that plateau understood. He ordered a fighting retreat to the capital. We were going to lose the plateau. We were probably going to lose the planet, and all we could do was buy time for the civilian evacuation that was already underway in Tavrith Sol below. I have been in difficult situations before. I have reported from war zones where the outcome was uncertain and the danger was real. But I had never felt what I felt that morning on the Caith Plateau. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear is sharp. This was something heavier, duller. It was the weight of inevitability, the slow, crushing understanding that no matter what anyone did, no matter how bravely they fought or how cleverly they maneuvered, it wasn't going to be enough. The Moravan were too many, too strong, too relentless. And then the comm channels went strange. I was in the back of a troop carrier, bouncing down the plateau's western access road toward the capital, when I first heard it. The carrier was packed, 12 Selvari soldiers and me, all of us covered in dust and smoke residue, all of us silent with the particular silence that comes after sustained combat. The vehicle's communication array was tuned to the compact's primary military frequency, and the chatter had been constant and grim. Unit positions, casualty reports, withdrawal coordinates, the organized chaos of an army in retreat. Then at 7:41, a new signal cut through. It wasn't on the standard compact frequency. It was on a broadband channel, open, unencrypted, broadcasting in the clear for anyone to hear. The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. Not Selvari, not Dreth, not Torani, not Moravan. It spoke in a language I didn't recognize, but the carrier's translation system processed it almost instantly, which meant whoever was speaking had already loaded their linguistic profile into the compact's database. That alone was strange. The compact's translation database was comprehensive, but it didn't include mythological languages. The message was short. Compact forces on Verathkas, this is Captain Alara Vasquez of the Terran expeditionary ship Adamantine. We are inbound to your position with a battle group of 37 vessels. Estimate arrival in the combat zone in 14 minutes. Please identify your current command frequency so we can coordinate. Silence. Absolute, complete silence in the carrier. Every soldier was staring at the comm unit. I was staring at the comm unit. The driver, a young corporal whose name I never learned, had actually taken his foot off the accelerator, and the carrier was coasting. Sergeant Caith, the senior soldier present, was the first to speak. She said what everyone was thinking. Terran, what the hell is a Terran? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Except, and I am being completely honest with you here, except that I felt something. A prickling at the back of my mind. A half-remembered fragment from childhood. My grandmother, Selvari to her core, sitting by the cooling vent in our family home on Serath Prime, telling me stories about the Pale Walkers. The Burning Ones. They come from a world of water and stone, in the part of the sky where the light is poison. I pushed the thought away. It was absurd. Those were children's stories. The comm crackled again. This time it was Colonel Merath's voice, broadcasting from the command vehicle at the head of the retreat column. Unidentified vessel, this is Colonel Merath, Selvari 4th Legion. I do not have any record of a species called Terran in the compact registry. Identify your affiliation and authority for operating in this sector. A pause, then the voice came back, the same voice, Captain Vasquez, and there was something in her tone that I have spent years trying to describe accurately. It wasn't arrogant, it wasn't threatening, it was certain, the way gravity is certain, the way the vacuum of space is certain. A thing so sure of itself that the concept of doubt seemed to have been politely removed from its vocabulary. Colonel, we're not in the compact registry because we've never been contacted by your government. We're from a system called Sol in the Third Arm. We picked up your distress signals about 6 days ago and came as fast as we could. I understand you're probably confused. I'd be happy to discuss the details after we've dealt with the fleet that's currently bombarding your planet. How copy? 6 days. They had traveled from the Third Arm, in 6 days. The fastest ships in the compact fleet couldn't make that crossing in under 30. Colonel Merath, to his eternal credit, did not waste time asking follow-up questions. Copy, Captain Vasquez. Transmitting command frequency and tactical data now. Welcome to the worst day in Verathkas' history. Understood, Colonel. We'll see what we can do about that. 14 minutes is not a long time. Unless you are waiting for something impossible to arrive. Then it is an eternity. The retreat continued. The Moravan were pressing hard behind us, their advance elements already cresting the plateau and beginning to descend toward the capital. The Dreth Ironwall Brigade was fighting a rearguard action on the northern approach, brutal, close quarters work that the Dreth were built for but couldn't sustain indefinitely. The sky above was a constant light show of orbital combat, flashes and streaks, and the occasional terrible beauty of a ship dying, a brief new star that flared and faded. I counted the minutes. At the 11-minute mark, the Moravan orbital fleet shifted formation. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. I was watching the tactical feed on the carrier's secondary display, and the red icons representing the Moravan ships suddenly began to move in a way they hadn't before. They were turning, redirecting. A significant portion of their fleet was breaking away from the engagement with the 9th Combined Fleet and reorienting toward something. Something that wasn't on the display yet. 12 minutes. The Moravan comm channels, the encrypted ones that Compact Intelligence had been partially monitoring throughout the engagement, suddenly erupted with traffic. I couldn't read the encryption, but the volume alone told a story. Something had alarmed them. The Moravan didn't alarm easily. 13 minutes. Then I saw the light. Not the light of weapons fire, not the light of ships entering or leaving faster than light travel. Something different, something I had no reference for. At the edge of the sky, just above the eastern horizon, space itself seemed to fold. That's the best word I have. It folded like fabric being pinched between two fingers, and through the fold came light, hard, white, absolute light, the kind that doesn't illuminate so much as it replaces whatever was there before. And out of that light came ships. 37 of them. They were nothing like compact vessels, nothing like Moravan vessels, nothing like anything I had ever seen or studied or imagined. Compact ships are elegant. Curved hulls, flowing lines, aesthetically considered designs that reflect the Selvari preference for beauty in all things, even instruments of war. Moravan ships are brutal. Angular, oversized, covered in weapons arrays and armor plating, designed to intimidate as much as fight. These ships, the Terran ships, were something else entirely. They were functional. That's the word that kept coming back to me. Every surface, every angle, every protrusion served a purpose. No decoration, no aesthetic consideration, no wasted space. They looked like they had been designed by something that understood violence on a molecular level and had decided to express that understanding in metal and fire. The largest of them, the one I would later learn was the Adamantine, was roughly the size of a compact heavy cruiser. Not the biggest ship in the fight, not even close. The Moravan flagship was easily 5 times its mass. It didn't matter. What happened in the next 9 minutes has been analyzed, debated, studied, and taught at every military academy in the Compact. I am not going to give you a tactical breakdown. Smarter people than me have done that. I am going to tell you what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt, because I think that matters more. The Terran fleet did not slow down when it entered the combat zone. I want you to understand that. Every fleet doctrine in the Compact, and as far as we know every Moravan doctrine as well, calls for a deceleration phase upon entering a contested space. You slow down, you assess, you form up, you engage. It is logical. It is sensible. The Terrans accelerated. They came out of their fold space transit at a velocity that the carrier's tactical computer flagged as a sensor error. It wasn't. They were simply moving faster than the computer believed was possible for objects of that size. And they didn't slow down when they reached the Moravan formation. They punched through it. I watched it on the tactical display. The blue icons, the Terran ships, hit the red Moravan formation like a fist hitting water. They didn't engage from a distance. They didn't trade long-range fire. They drove directly into the heart of the Moravan fleet at close range and opened fire with everything they had. The energy readings were extraordinary. The carrier's sensors were struggling to process the output. The Terran weapons were operating at power levels that exceeded the sensor's calibration range. Warning indicators were flashing. The display was stuttering. Data was coming in faster than the system could render it. On the open comm channel, I heard Captain Vasquez's voice again. Calm, even, almost conversational. All Terran ships execute Hammerfall. Weapons free. Hammerfall. The name, I would later learn, was a reference to something from the Terrans' own mythology. I found that appropriate, mythology meeting mythology. In the carrier, we had stopped moving. The driver had pulled off the road, and everyone, soldiers, driver, me, was crowded around the tactical display. The sounds of ground combat were still audible behind us. The Moravan advance elements were still coming. None of that seemed to matter anymore, because what was happening in orbit was the most extraordinary thing any of us had ever witnessed. The Terran ships fought like nothing I had ever seen. They fought together in a way that went beyond coordination. It was more like they were parts of a single organism, each ship instinctively aware of where the others were and what they needed. They covered each other's flanks. They created overlapping fields of fire that left no safe approach for the Moravan. They rotated damaged ships to the interior of their formation and brought fresh ones forward without ever losing cohesion. And they were aggressive, savagely, almost recklessly aggressive. A Selvari commander would never close to the range the Terrans were fighting at. A Dreth commander might in extremis, but they would do it grudgingly as a last resort. The Terrans did it by choice. They wanted to be close. They wanted to be in the teeth of the enemy, where precision mattered more than firepower and nerve mattered more than numbers. 3 minutes into the engagement, the first Moravan capital ship died. Just died. One moment it was there, a massive angular fortress bristling with weapons, and the next it was expanding cloud of debris and superheated gas. The Terrans had concentrated fire from 4 ships on a single point in its hull, and whatever shields or armor the Moravan had simply failed. 4 minutes, 2 more Moravan capitals gone. 5 minutes, the Moravan formation was fragmenting. They were trying to create distance to use their numerical advantage to spread out and envelope the smaller Terran fleet. It wasn't working. The Terrans were too fast. Every time the Moravan tried to reposition, the Terrans were already there, already firing, already cutting them apart. I heard a sound beside me. Sergeant Caith was laughing. Not a full laugh, a breathless, disbelieving half-laugh. The sound someone makes when reality has departed so far from expectation that the only possible response is absurdity. "What are they?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I was watching the display. I was watching the Moravan fleet, the fleet that had seemed so overwhelming, so unstoppable, so inevitable just 20 minutes ago, come apart like something rotten. 7 minutes. The Moravan flagship was trying to withdraw. The largest, most powerful warship in their fleet was trying to run. 2 Terran ships, just 2, had positioned themselves between it and its escape vector, and they were refusing to move. The flagship was pouring fire into them. The tactical display showed their shields fluctuating, dropping, recovering, dropping again. They were taking terrible punishment, but they held. 8 minutes. A Terran ship, the Resolute, I would later learn, broke formation and drove directly at the Moravan flagship. Alone, unsupported. It was half the flagship's size. It closed the distance at full acceleration, weathered a barrage that should have destroyed it twice over, and rammed its forward weapons array into the flagship's main hangar bay at point-blank range. Then it fired everything it had, all at once, into the guts of the ship. The Moravan flagship split. Not exploded, split. Down the center like a seed pod opening. I saw the internal fires bloom through the crack before the atmosphere vented and the flames died. The 2 halves tumbled apart, spilling debris and bodies into the void. 9 minutes. The Moravan fleet, what was left of it, broke. Not an organized retreat. A rout. Ships scattering in every direction, abandoning formation, abandoning each other, running for the system's edge and the safety of faster-than-light escape. The Terrans let most of them go. Most. The ones that were still firing on compact ships, the ones that were still launching ground assault pods, those ships the Terrans hunted down and killed with a precision that was almost surgical. No waste, no excess, just clean, efficient destruction. In the carrier, nobody spoke, nobody moved. The tactical display showed the aftermath, the expanding debris fields, the drifting wrecks, the compact ships slowly regrouping, and the Terran formation, compact and tight, holding position over Verathkas like a closed fist. 37 ships. 37 ships had just broken a fleet of 200. I looked at Sergeant Caith. She was staring at the display with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, maybe, or something deeper. Something that looked like the moment when a person realizes that everything they thought they knew about the universe was incomplete. "Sergeant," I said, "the burning ones, the myths." She looked at me. Her silver eyes were very wide. "Those aren't myths," she said quietly. "Those are warnings." The ground battle ended shortly after. Not because the Moravan ground forces surrendered, they didn't at first. The Moravan are many things, but cowardly is not among them. Even cut off from orbital support, even with their fleet shattered above them, The ground legions continued to advance on Tavrith-Sol. Then the Terrans landed. The Adamantine dispatched 4 shuttles, 4, not troop transports, shuttles, each one carrying, as I would later count, approximately 30 soldiers. 120 Terran ground troops, against roughly 8,000 Moravan legionnaires. I should have been terrified for them. 120 soldiers, soft-bodied soldiers, soldiers from a species that the galaxy considered mythological, against 8,000 Moravan. The numbers were insane. The odds were beyond calculation. I wasn't terrified for them. I don't know why. Something about the way they moved, maybe. Something about the way they came down from the sky. The shuttles landed on the Caith Plateau, right in the middle of the ground the 4th Legion had abandoned less than an hour earlier, right in the path of the advancing Moravan army. The shuttle doors opened, and the Terrans stepped out into the amber-glowing grass and the smoke-hazed air of a battlefield, and I got my first look at humanity. I was watching through my imaging drone, which I had sent back toward the plateau when the orbital battle ended. The feed was clear, high resolution. I could see details. They were smaller than I expected. Average height maybe 1.8 meters, shorter than a Selvari, half the height of a Moravan. Their skin came in various shades of brown and pink and tan. They wore armor, not exoskeletons like the Moravan, but fitted plates of something dark and matte that covered their torsos, limbs, and heads. They carried weapons that looked crude by compact standards, blocky, angular, functional, like their ships. They moved quickly, efficiently, no wasted motion. They spread out across the plateau in small groups, 4 or 5 soldiers per group, and took up positions among the rocks and craters and shattered fortifications. They didn't bunch up. They didn't form lines. They dispersed, becoming small and scattered and hard to target. The Moravan saw them. Of course they did. 8,000 soldiers, don't miss 120 newcomers landing on an open plateau. The lead Moravan elements redirected toward the Terran positions, probably assuming this would be a brief and entertaining diversion. It was brief. It was not the kind of entertainment they expected. The Terrans waited. They let the Moravan close to within what I estimated was about 400 meters, and then they opened fire. The sound was different from compact weapons. Compact energy weapons produce a high, sharp crack, clean and precise. The Terran weapons produced a deep, stuttering roar, rapid, sustained, a sound like something tearing the air apart one piece at a time. And the Moravan started falling. Not slowly, not one at a time, in clusters, in groups. The Terran weapons were doing something that compact weapons couldn't. They were penetrating the Moravan kinetic barriers. I don't know the physics. I'm a journalist, not an engineer. But I watched Moravan soldiers, 3-meter-tall, armored, shielded Moravan soldiers, stagger and drop under the Terran fire, and their barriers flickered and failed in ways I had never seen. Later, much later, a Terran weapons engineer explained it to me. She used a phrase that I have never forgotten. She said their weapons were designed around a principle called overwhelming kinetic saturation. She said it meant they didn't try to outsmart barriers or find frequencies to bypass shields. They just hit them with so much, so fast, that the barriers couldn't keep up. Brute force, elegant in its simplicity, terrifying in its application. The Moravan didn't retreat, not at first. They pushed forward, absorbing losses, trying to close the distance where their size and strength would give them the advantage. In close combat, one Moravan was worth 4 or 5 of any other species. Everyone knew that. The first Moravan soldier reached a Terran position. I saw it on my drone feed. A massive Moravan legionnaire, augmentation rigs sparking and smoking from multiple hits, barreled into a cluster of rocks where 2 Terran soldiers were positioned. What followed took maybe 6 seconds. The first Terran rolled sideways, avoiding the Moravan's initial charge with a speed that seemed impossible. The second Terran, a woman, I think, though it was hard to tell through the armor, stepped forward, directly into the Moravan's path, and did something with her weapon. She reversed it, held it by the barrel, and she swung the stock into the Moravan's forward knee joint with a force that buckled the augmentation rig's support strut. The Moravan stumbled, went down to one knee, and the first Terran was back on his feet, weapon up, and put 3 rounds into the gap between the Moravan's chest plate and neck guard from a distance of maybe 2 meters. The Moravan fell. 6 seconds, 2 Terrans, 1 dead Moravan. I thought about the myths, the stories my grandmother told. They are small and they are fragile and they die so easily. But do not make the mistake of believing that makes them weak. Nothing in the universe fights harder than a thing that knows it can die. The engagement on the plateau lasted 31 minutes. 120 Terrans against 8,000 Moravan. When it was over, the Moravan were in full retreat, streaming off the plateau's eastern edge, leaving their dead behind them. The Terrans had lost 11 soldiers. 11. The Moravan had lost over 600 in direct combat with an unknown number wounded. The remaining Moravan ground forces, scattered across the approaches to Verathkas, began surrendering within the hour. Not to the compact forces, to the Terrans. Specifically, they asked to surrender to the Terrans. I asked a captured Moravan officer why. He looked at me with his dark, volcanic eyes, and he said something that the translator rendered as, "Because the others fight because they must. The small ones fight because they choose to. That is more frightening than anything I have ever faced." The aftermath was chaos, the good kind if there is such a thing. The Compact's government was in turmoil. The Ninth Fleet's commander, Admiral Sorventhi, spent 3 hours in emergency communication with the Compact Council trying to explain what had happened and who these people were. The Council, apparently, was having difficulty accepting that a species from the most inhospitable region of the galaxy had just saved one of the Compact's core worlds with a force that was, by any reasonable standard, absurdly small. I didn't care about the politics, not yet. I wanted to meet them. I got my chance that evening local time. Captain Verathkas came down from the Adamantine in a shuttle that landed at the spaceport in Verathkas, which was scarred and smoking from the day's fighting but still functional. Colonel Merath met her on the landing pad. I was there, standing behind a line of Selvari officers, my imaging drone hovering discreetly above. Captain Verathkas stepped out of the shuttle, and I saw a human up close for the first time. She was shorter than me, maybe 1.7 meters. Her skin was a warm brown, her hair was dark and pulled back in a tight knot. She had a scar on her left temple, a thin, white line that ran from above her eyebrow to just in front of her ear. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they moved constantly, taking in everything, assessing, evaluating. She wore the same dark, functional armor as her ground troops, though hers was marked with symbols I didn't understand. She carried herself like Valith, like someone who had been in enough dangerous situations that baseline alertness had become her resting state. Colonel Merath stepped forward. He towered over her by almost half a meter. He extended his hand, the traditional Selvari greeting of equals. "Captain Verathkas," he said, "I owe you a debt that I suspect will take a very long time to repay." She took his hand. Her grip, I noticed, was firm, not aggressive, but firm. She looked up at him, and she smiled, and the smile transformed her face from something sharp and watchful into something warm. "You owe us nothing, Colonel. We heard a call for help. We came. That's what people do." That's what people do. 4 words, simple, unremarkable, and yet they hit me with a force that had nothing to do with weapons or ships or orbital bombardments. Because in all my years covering the Compact's wars, in all the political maneuvering and strategic calculation and cost-benefit analysis that governed every military decision, I had never heard anyone describe intervention in those terms. Not we calculated the strategic advantage, not we assessed the geopolitical implications, not our intelligence services determined that involvement was beneficial to our interests. We heard a call for help, we came. That's what people do. I recorded the moment. I have watched that recording many times since. It does not get less remarkable. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Medical teams from the Terran ships came down to assist with the wounded. Terran engineers helped stabilize damaged infrastructure. Terran soldiers stood guard alongside Selvari and Dreth troops, watching the perimeter while the chaos of the aftermath was sorted. I moved through it all, recording, observing. I spoke to Terran soldiers whenever I could. They were, without exception, friendly. Open, curious about the Compact species in a way that seemed entirely genuine. They asked questions about Selvari culture, about the bioluminescent grass, about the lavender oceans. They shared their food, compact, dense bars of something they called rations that tasted significantly worse than Keshari, and they laughed about it, acknowledging that their food was terrible with a self-deprecating humor that I found charming. One interaction stands out. I found a Terran medic, a young man with pale skin and light-colored hair, treating a wounded Torani civilian in a makeshift aid station near the spaceport. The Torani was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She had been caught in debris when a Moravan orbital strike hit the residential district near the port. Her left leg was badly injured, and she was crying, a high, thin sound that was universal across species. The medic didn't speak Torani. The child didn't speak whatever language the Terrans used. There was no translation device available. They had all been distributed to the military coordination teams. They had no common words between them. But the medic was talking to her anyway. A constant, gentle stream of words in his own language, soft and rhythmic, while his hands worked with careful precision on her leg. And the child, despite not understanding a single word, had stopped crying. She was watching his face, watching his eyes. He finished treating the wound, wrapped it carefully, and then reached into his belt pouch. He pulled out a small object. It was flat, rectangular, made of something flexible. He unfolded it, and I saw that it was a picture. An image of a small animal with soft fur, large eyes, and an absurdly long tail. The medic showed it to the child and made a sound, a soft, rumbling vibration in his chest. The child stared at the picture. Then she reached out one small, blue-skinned hand and touched the image of the animal. She looked up at the medic. And she smiled. He smiled back. I stood there imaging drone forgotten, datapad at my side, and I watched a human and a Torani child share a moment of connection that transcended species, language, biology, and the burning wreckage of a war zone. And I thought, this is the story, not the battle, not the ships. Not the orbital engagement that military historians will study for generations. This moment, a medic and a child and a picture of an animal and a shared smile in the middle of devastation. This is what the myths were about. I am going to end this part of the account here because what comes next, the diplomatic aftermath, the formal contact, the revelations about human history and capability that would reshape the Compact's understanding of the galaxy, deserves its own space, its own weight. But I want to leave you with one more thing. That night after the battles were over and the fires were dying and the sky above Verathkas was dark again, except for the faint, scattered lights of the combined fleet in high orbit, I stood on the outskirts of Tavrith Sol. The bioluminescent grass had begun to recover, slowly, hesitantly, amber light creeping back into the fields like hope returning to a frightened animal. A Terran soldier was standing nearby. I didn't know her name. She was looking up at the sky. Her helmet was off, and her hair, dark red, a color I had never seen on a living being, was moving slightly in the night breeze. She looked tired. The kind of tired that goes past the body and settles into the bones. I walked over. She noticed me, nodded. "Long day," she said. "Yes," I agreed, "long day." We stood there together in silence for a while, two strangers from opposite ends of the galaxy, watching the stars. Then I asked her the question that had been forming in my mind since the first Terran transmission. "Why did you come? You didn't know us, you had no treaty with the Compact, no obligation, no strategic reason. You crossed half the galaxy to fight and die for strangers. Why?" She looked at me. Her eyes were green, a pale, clear green like shallow water over light stone. She thought about the question for a moment, and I could see she was taking it seriously, not treating it as obvious, genuinely considering it. "You know what?" she said eventually. "I don't think any of us could have just not come. We heard people were in trouble, innocent people, civilians, kids." She paused, looked back up at the stars. "Back home we have this saying, it's old, really old, goes something like, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." She shrugged, a small human gesture that conveyed more than any speech. "We're not good at doing nothing." I recorded those words. I have carried them with me ever since, across star systems, across years, across the vast and ongoing story of what happened after humanity stopped being a myth and became a reality. They are not good at doing nothing. Remember that.